Talk about the request for assistance we received from the Government of Quebec Wednesday and give you the latest news about medical equipment supplies. The Minister of Public Security worked with Quebec and the Minister of National Defence, and I can now confirm that some 125 members of the Canadian Armed Forces who are trained in healthcare will go to Quebec and help the workers in their long-term care facilities. We continue working with the Government of Quebec to find other ways of supporting them, including with the Red Cross and specialized volunteers that are registered with Health Canada. With regard to the supply of medical equipment, Bell Canada made a gift of 1.5 million of N95 masks, and we're working as quickly as possible to send them out to our first-line health workers. This is in addition to the million masks surgical masks that we sent to territories this week.
Created anxiety and uncertainty for all Canadians, but some are going through an especially tough time. COVID-19 has brought many industries to a halt, and workers across the country are struggling as a result. From the start, our goal as a government has been clear: to help all Canadians get through these challenging times. As I've said many times before, we're here to support you, to lend you a helping hand when you need it most. Across the country, Canadians are standing shoulder to shoulder, and we're all in this together. Today, our government is announcing more help for workers in Alberta, Saskatchewan, BC, and Newfoundland and Labrador. We're also announcing more help for small businesses and more help for those who work in the arts, culture, and sports sectors. I'll start with the energy sector. Right now, workers and families are struggling because of things beyond their control. Both the devastating effects of the pandemic and the price war driven by foreign interests are a challenge. As a result, companies have had to slow down or pause their operations, leaving too many people out of work. To help these workers, our government will invest $1.7 billion to clean up orphan and inactive wells in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC. These wells, which are no longer in use, can be detrimental not only to our environment, but to people's health. Think of the farmer who can't grow anything on his land because of an abandoned well a few steps away from his home. Think of the small town or Indigenous community struggling with this issue that has been festering for years or even decades. Cleaning them up will bring people back to work and help many landowners who've had these wells on their property for years but haven't been able to get them taken care of and the land restored. Our goal is to create immediate jobs in these provinces while helping companies avoid bankruptcy and supporting our environmental targets. In Alberta alone, these investments will maintain 5,200 jobs. We've listened to the concerns of landowners, municipalities, and Indigenous communities who want to make sure that the polluter pay principle is strengthened and that their voices are heard. I want to thank the Government of Alberta for working with us and listening to their concerns. Our government will also establish a $750 million emission reduction fund with a focus on methane to create and maintain jobs through pollution reduction efforts. This includes $75 million to help the offshore industry cut emissions in Newfoundland and Labrador. This fund will primarily provide repayable contributions to firms to make them more competitive, reduce waste and pollution, and most importantly, protect jobs. Right now, many energy firms are experiencing a cash crunch, so they don't have the funds to invest in technologies to reduce emissions or fix methane leaks. Today's announcement will allow for this kind of work to be done and create jobs people need during this difficult time. Through the wells and methane initiatives, we estimate that we will maintain roughly 10,000 jobs across the country. Just because we're in a health crisis doesn't mean we can neglect the environmental crisis. We're also working with BDC and EDC to expand credit support for at-risk medium-sized energy companies so they can maintain operations and keep their employees. Notre gouvernement va investir
Our
1.7
government will be giving $1.7 billion to clean up abandoned wells and orphan wells in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia. The objective is to create employment for persons in the sector, avoid the businesses going bankrupt, and support the environment. These unused wells, no longer used to produce the oil, can present risks not only for the environment, but also for our health. By cleaning them up, we will create jobs for workers. We will also help people who have these abandoned wells on their land for some time and can't get rid of them. We foresee that these will allow us to provide 5,200 jobs in Alberta alone. We developed this policy with the government of Alberta and our municipal partners, and I'd like to thank them for their contribution. Our government will also be implementing a fund of some $750 million to reduce emissions of methane in particular in order to create and maintain jobs. Of that amount, some $75 million will be given to the offshore producers in Newfoundland and Labrador in order to reduce their emission. This fund will be mainly reimbursable contributions given to companies to protect jobs, increase competitiveness, and reduce pollution. Currently, businesses in the energy sector are facing a cash crunch, which means they do not have the funds necessary to invest in technologies that help to reduce emissions or repair methane leaks. Today's announcement will allow businesses to undertake these work while creating jobs for workers during this difficult period we're going through. This public health crisis should not prevent us from acting against the climate crisis simultaneously. With this initiative to clean up the wells and the fund to reduce emissions, we estimate that some 10,000 jobs will be maintained. Simultaneously, we're also working with the BDC and EDC in order to reinforce the support for credit for mid-sized energy companies that are particularly at risk. Once again, the objective there is to allow businesses to continue their activities and keep their employees on the payroll.
I want to turn to what we're going to do next for small businesses and the people they employ. Over the past few weeks, we've taken a number of steps to support these employers and mostly their employees. We introduced the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy to help keep people on the payroll. We launched and expanded the Canada Emergency Business Account for those businesses struggling with cash flow. But Ministers Joly, Ng, Baines, and others have heard that some businesses are still falling through the cracks. To fix that, our government will provide $962 million to regional development agencies and the Community Futures Network. This funding will help ensure that more businesses, especially smaller employees based in more rural parts of the country or those who don't have a relationship with a traditional financial institution, are getting the support that they need. We're also going to give $270 million to Futurepreneur and the Industrial Research Assistance Program to support innovators and other early-stage development firms that don't qualify for the wage subsidy but still need help. Pour ce qui est des petites entreprises, on annonce aujourd'hui.
Now, for small businesses, today we are announcing two other investments. First, our government will pay out $962 million to regional development agencies and the Community Futures Network. This money will allow us to offer the assistance necessary to small businesses that are not qualified for the Emergency Response Fund or to obtain a loan from the Emergency Fund for Businesses. Second, our government will provide $267 for Futurepreneur and others to support innovators and other people that are launching businesses but that are not eligible for the wage subsidy program. We also have news for those working in the arts, culture, and sports sectors. These industries a little bit like small businesses that I just talked about, were not eligible oftentimes for the assistance we've already set up because their revenue models are different or they're not losing money in the same way. Since the beginning of the current crisis, artists have been bringing comfort, laughs, and happiness into our lives. Athletes continue to inspire us, encourage us, and appeal to our pride. Those who work in the areas of arts, culture, and sports are sharing their passion with us and make us dream. So these days, when we're all isolated at home, they make us feel a little bit less lonely. These are but some of the reasons for which we should be there for them, as they are for us. Our government will therefore be giving $500 million to Canadian Heritage to support our artists, our creators, and our rising sports stars. Thanks to these funds, these people will be able to receive salary support, and organizations will have access to financing if they have cash flow problems.
We give $500 million to Heritage Canada to support those who work in the arts, culture, and sports sectors. Like the small businesses I was talking about, people and businesses in these sectors do not have access to some of the help we've announced because of how the companies operate or how revenues are generated. With this investment, people will be able to receive wage support, and organizations that are struggling with cash flow will be able to access financing. At the same time, we continue to support those who've lost their jobs with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. So far, over 7.5 million payments have been made. That's money sent directly to those who need it most. I want to again thank our amazing public servants who are processing these claims at record speeds. Moving forward, we will be releasing the latest figures on the CERB through the government's open data portal 3 times a week, so academics, researchers, and Canadians can keep track of the work being done. We will continue to provide and open up data so that we can get the best advice from experts and continue to help Canadians. I want to end this morning by reminding everyone that today is the 38th anniversary of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which underpins who we are as a country and who we strive to be as a people. It protects the right of each and every one of us to be who we are, to worship how we want, to love whom we love. At the heart of the Charter is the notion of choice, that we can choose the kind of life we want for ourselves. As our country confronts this pandemic, I'm especially grateful that Canadians have chosen to protect each other and care for one another. To everyone who has stayed home and followed public health recommendations, thank you. Making that choice together today will ensure that we remain who we are as Canadians for generations to come. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Je suis maintenant content de prendre les questions.
Thank you, everybody. I'll now answer questions. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. We'll start the question period with the phone operator.
Merci. Thank you. The first question, Dylan Robertson, Winnipeg Free Press, line open.
Prime Minister, you've expressed a preference for virtual parliament. Many regions of Canada have terrible internet connections, and they tend to be the ones that feel the most ignored by Ottawa. Are you comfortable with having virtual sittings if MPs can't participate in real time from their homes?
Obviously, the point of virtual sittings would be to ensure that Canadians who are not within driving distance of Ottawa continue to have their views represented and their concerns heard. That is a technological challenge that we will work very, very hard on to ensure that as we move forward on virtual parliament solutions, as the Speaker and the House of Commons work on that, that we make sure that every voice can be heard of the 338 Canadians. At the same time, we have proposed to the opposition parties that Parliament could come back every single week to discuss legislation and to ensure that there is accountability. We need to make sure that our democracy continues to function, and this is something that we are very serious about. We recognize right now, on the books, there is a rule that says that 338 MPs need to get on flights Friday or Sunday evening to come back to Ottawa on Monday morning as Parliament is supposed to resume. That is obviously not a good idea. We are not in normal circumstances, so we're negotiating with all opposition parties to try and make sure we can find a way to keep the important work of our democracy going while at the same time respecting public health advice. D'abord, de regarder un Parlement virtuel.
Well, in order to have a virtual parliament, it's important to ensure that this will allow deputies throughout the country to share the concerns of their constituents, and that is why we're working with the parties in the House to ensure that we find the technological solutions allowing this. We also recognize that it's important our democracy continue to be at work, and that is why we proposed that Parliament can sit weekly in order to vote bills and ensure that accountability is met and that the government answers questions. We hope that the opposition parties will accept our proposal, because otherwise Parliament is supposed to sit with its 338 members on Monday morning, and I think that that's not a good idea right now.
Prime Minister, the Manitoba Premier has asked for an emergency credit agency to access better interest rates. Governor Polo says that your government did not ask the Bank of Canada to help with the provincial debt market. He said no one has asked us to do anything on the provincial front. The Premier has also asked to put public servants on EI. Today's job announcement doesn't put the provincial debt markets. So my question is, when will the provinces learn what you're doing for their debts, and what is already off the table?
I had an excellent conversation last night with the premiers of all the provinces and territories. This issue was brought up, and I assured them that Finance Canada is looking at it. We recognize that different provinces carry different debt loads and different challenges on access to credit. The Bank of Canada has taken significant measures that have had a positive impact on provincial coffers. At the same time, we will continue to make sure that provinces across the country are able to give the support they need to give to their citizens.
Thank you. Next question, moderator.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Althea Raj, Huffington Post. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. You've announced a number of measures today and also earlier this week changes to help those with some income apply for the CRB. You've lowered the threshold for some business owners to apply for interest-free loans. But still, a number of people I've spoken with this week are not impacted by any of these changes. What should people in these positions, people who are left out and who have a hard time making ends meet, do? Should they apply for the CRB, or should they wait for your government to come up with another fix?
From the very beginning, we knew we had to help as many people as we possibly could who needed the help as quickly as possible. That's why we moved forward with two very big, very strong programs, both the Canada Emergency Response Benefit that has sent out over 7.5 million payments already, and the wage subsidy, which will kick in a few weeks, which is allowing employers to rehire their employees so that when the economy bounces back, people will still have those links to their jobs while they are supported in this time of difficulty. But from the beginning, we recognized that moving quickly and broadly would leave gaps. And that's why over the past weeks, we have been announcing almost every single day new measures that tweak the proposals we've made, that expand other proposals, that create new initiatives to try and make sure we're getting help to everyone who needs them. The announcements we've made today around help for the arts and cultural sectors, for sporting organizations, for small businesses like startups, for small businesses in rural areas, for the range of workers in the energy sector who are facing layers of calamity right now. are the kinds of things that we're making sure that everyone is getting the help we need. We are continuing to listen to Canadians who are expressing that they are not getting the help they need, and we are constantly looking for ways to help them.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, thank you. So are you basically saying wait until the government comes up with another fix? Because as you know, on Saturday, MPs voted to support a motion that basically said that if you need help, the government is going to ensure that if you applied for CERB and you weren't supposed to be eligible, that you would be unjustly penalized. So is the government saying that the worst thing that will happen to you if you apply for CERB but don't actually qualify, that you will have to pay the money back in full next year? Is that the worst thing that will happen to people who apply for CERB because they feel they need it?
We expect people to apply for the programs for which they qualify, and we are therefore working to make sure we're expanding the qualifications so that people who need the help will get them. We will continue to announce measures that will include more and more people, help more and more people as we move forward, because for all the millions of people and companies and businesses and employers that we're helping across this country, we know there is more to do, and that's what we're continually announcing almost every day, new measures to fix support for people in particular situations. We
recognize that the programs that we had to create quickly in order to help the most people possible are not adapted for people in particular situations. That is why for several weeks now, almost every day, we have been announcing changes, widening of the various programs in order to allow people to receive more help according to the various programs we're making available. Next question, moderator.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Marie Vastel, Le Devoir.
Marie Vastel, Le Devoir. Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to come back to your assistance program for the oil sector. Many people were expecting that you would do more. Some had suggested that the government purchase shares in the oil companies like they did for car companies in the 2008 crisis. Are you prepared to do so? And if not, why not? Our emphasis from the outset was to help Canadians who are in trouble, help families, people who need assistance. That is why we put up the wage subsidy and the CERB in order to help millions of Canadians in all industries throughout the country. But we also saw clearly that the oil industry is facing particular challenges because of what's happening on the international markets with the price of oil, and also because of a lowering demand due to the disease. So with all of these challenges, we thought we had to do a little bit more, and that is just what we're doing. We will continue to see if more needs to be done, but we want to always ensure, first and foremost, that we are helping families and workers who need help in this emergency situation.
Took as an approach from the very beginning that we need to help Canadians. We need to help workers and families who are hit by this COVID-19 slowdown and shutdown. That's why we move forward with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit that has helped millions upon millions of Canadians, and the wage subsidy, which has allowed companies to rehire workers and will ensure that families across the country get much more support. And that is across all industries, across the country. However, we recognize that certain industries are facing even more difficult times. The oil and gas sector, because of the global price war, because of the lower demand related to COVID, and because of the measures brought in to counter COVID itself, those families are particularly hard hit. And that's where this initiative, which will create or preserve 5,200 jobs in Alberta, and the other initiatives, which will lead to perhaps 10,000 jobs across the energy sector, are the kinds of things that we can do right now. Of course, we will continue to work with partners and concerned sectors across the country as we move forward to see if there's a need to do more.
En suivi, Marie.
Follow-up question. Yes, some feared that before your announcement today that your position might be influenced by some of the personal positions of some of your members of your cabinet about the oil and gas sector. You're now talking about assistance to clean up abandoned wells, to fight against gas emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. What are you answering to those who are disappointed with the extent of the program and who will accuse you of having been unduly influenced by the position of some members of your cabinet? Answer: the personal convictions of members of the cabinet, and we've always been united on that, is to help Canadians in need, to fight against the COVID-19 crisis and to ensure that we get through it and continue to be an extraordinary country in the years to come. That's our priority. That is why the assistance we sent to workers with the two main measures, the CERB and the wage subsidy, are there for all. But we're also doing more, which was asked for by the government of Alberta for some time now, to help clean up abandoned wells, to ensure that the companies who have to reduce their emissions even more have the funds necessary to undertake the measures necessary to reduce it, in particular methane. That is the choice we made to help Canadians and to prepare for us a future in which all Canadians will find themselves at home and have a better job. The last question for the telephone person, operator.
Prochaine question, Mélanie Marquis, La Presse.
Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. Thank you. Good day, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to come back to the use of the military in Quebec. Where will these military personnel come from? What will be their role? And why are there only so few of them when the long-term care facilities are in a very difficult situation? Answer: we worked with the government of Quebec yesterday in order to put together an assistance package. These 125 members of the Canadian Forces will bring important help to the Quebec long-term care facilities. We recognize that we could have more done with the Red Cross and the Bank of Volunteers that we have at Health Canada. Quebec also has a Bank of Volunteers, by the way, that they're calling upon, and we will continue to help in the best way possible, always trying to do more. But the situation with the forces is that we're limited by medical considerations in all organizations, including the Canadian Forces. Follow-up question, Mélanie? Just to get a little bit more on that, I realize that there's some medical restrictions here, but they could do other things, and I know that there's a need for that. And Mr. Trudeau, according to information that I'm hearing, an agreement was reached with the United States about the border. Could you speak to that, please? Yes. As I've always said, we are in continuous discussions with our southern neighbor, partner, and friend in order that we have, both of us, the means to protect our Canadians. My priority is always to protect Canadians, and we'll continue to work with the Americans to ensure that the borders remain safe. As I've often said, I do not expect that border to be reopened in the short term. We will continue to listen to what science is telling us and to monitor very closely the evolution of the virus here in Canada and throughout the world before making decisions. And our discussions with the Americans remain positive, and they continue.
Conversations are constant and ongoing with the American administration on issues of mutual concern, including the border. As I've said, we do not feel that reopening the border anytime soon is likely. My responsibility is to ensure the protection and safety of Canadians. That is what we will continue to do, and the conversations with the Americans have been extremely aligned and extremely productive.
Glenn McGregor, CTV News. Prime Minister, for weeks now, you have been promising relief and aid for the energy sector. What you've announced today is going to help a comparatively small number of workers. It isn't going to do anything for the sector overall to help deal with devastating impact of this virus and the downturn in the world oil markets. My question is this it? Is this the package you were promising? And if so, what do you say to people in Western Canada, particularly, who was expecting more substantial relief?
The first things we did was move forward with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit that's putting money in the pockets of more than 7 million Canadians, including many people in the oil and gas sector who've lost their paychecks because of this COVID-19 crisis. On top of that, the wage subsidy allows Canadian workers to continue to receive their salaries, to continue to stay connected to their work in the oil and gas sector, which are significant helps for a major industry across this country. On top of that, we've been working with the government of Alberta and with industry to look at other things that can be necessary. We heard very clearly that the methane regulations that we are bringing in will be a challenge for industries to meet, and industry and others asked that we therefore back off on the methane regulations. We decided instead to lend them money to help them keep people working to upgrade and update their measures so we can continue to fight climate change and reduce emissions while keeping people at work. We've also heard very clearly, and not just from industry, but from municipalities, particularly rural municipalities, landowners across Alberta, that the issue of persistent orphan or inactive wells is a real challenge. And this is an opportunity for us to make sure that Albertans are getting to work in cleaning up their province, at the same time as we've gotten commitments by the government of Alberta to strengthen the regulations so we see fewer orphan and inactive wells in the future. We've also made credit available for medium-sized oil and gas companies who are facing particular challenges in terms of liquidity right now. We will continue to look at ways we can support important industries in this country, including the oil and gas sector. We look forward to doing that while at the same time keeping our focus squarely on the families and workers who need our help.
Prime Minister Julie Van Dusen, CBC News. You spoke to the premiers last night, so I'm hoping you can update us on this. Blaine Higgs, as an example, has said he's hoping to get his economy going by the summer. John Horgan this morning on CBC said that he and his Washington state counterpart could decide when the border opens. So I'm wondering, who decides all this? Is it you? Is it them? And if it is you, will there be national standards to guide them?
We talked last night about how important it is to be coordinated and agreed on the principles and the approaches that we take, while at the same time recognizing that the situation in PEI is very different from the situation in Ontario, very different from the situation in BC. There will be regional approaches, as there have been all along, to the next steps, but we all agreed that we need to continue to remain very, very vigilant as we carefully look at reopening the economy, about relaunching certain sectors in the future. We will continue our coordination around the principles and the steps that need to be taken. But of course, this is Canada, which means that there are very different needs and very different approaches that will be in place across the country. What we will be working on to coordinate and collaborate on is ensuring that the messages that get out and that the lens that we take and the data that we collect and the way we do this is aligned and coordinated so that we can maximize our chances of getting through this without having to fall back into self-isolation the way we have been these past few weeks.
One of the principles that we agreed upon with premiers is the importance of coordinating our efforts to collaborate to ensure that the steps taken about reopening the economy and the relaxing of the rules about social distancing and confinement be done in a coordinated fashion. Obviously, different provinces and regions will have different needs corresponding to their realities, and we recognize and respect that, obviously. However, if we can ensure good coordination so that Canadians understand that the same principles are being applied everywhere throughout the country, and that we collect the data in the same fashion, and we analyze the situation and answer in a vigilant fashion and with a uniform approach, it will maximize our possibility of getting through the crisis without having to impose more confinement or economic downturn.
Oil and gas lobby group says the federal government should consider suspending dozens of environmental regulations, laws, and policies due to the economic and health crisis triggered by COVID-19. Critics call it a crass attempt to exploit the pandemic. How do you respond to the letter? And are some of the 30 requests still being considered by the government?
Just because we are in one crisis right now doesn't mean we can forget about the other crisis, the climate crisis that we are also facing as a world, as a country. But we recognize that, for example, moving ahead with the methane regulations is something very difficult for companies right now in the oil and gas sector who are strained because of the multiple challenges they're facing both on the global stage and on the lower demand. That's why we're making investments in supporting those companies directly so that they can meet those methane reduction targets with funds that we're giving them, so that we can stay on track to protect future generations and to reduce emissions from our industry. This is something that Canadians understand, that we need to continue to move forward, but we need to help people in different ways as we move forward. That will be the lens that we take.
And on a separate matter, China has revised its numbers on the Wuhan deaths, increasing them by 50%. Do you think this is a statistical verification, as China claims, or proof they covered it up?
I think we all need to be very attentive to how data flows around the world and be very thoughtful about how we process different information and how we apply the lessons learned from elsewhere around the world to what we do. We will continue to work with partners and allies and international institutions and organizations as we figure out how to get through today and tomorrow. But there will be many questions to ask once we are through this on how various countries behaved and what sort of principles we need to learn from and conclusions we need to draw as we move forward. Je pense que nous avons besoin.
I believe we need to have a close look at the numbers put forward by various countries in the world. Obviously, we will have to draw some conclusion eventually about the behavior of various countries, but for now, we're called to work together and to collaborate and do everything we need to do to learn and better protect our citizens at home.
Prime Minister, other world leaders have raised serious questions about China's handling of this pandemic and whether it holds responsibility for not containing it within its borders. It's not just the White House, it's also leaders in France and the United Kingdom. Here at home, your government has taken the opposite approach, with one former Canadian ambassador calling Ottawa's approach almost humiliating. In your answer just now, you didn't even mention China by name. So why is your government so reluctant to acknowledge China's possible faults in this pandemic?
My job right now is to make sure that Canadians get the best support, the best protection, and are able to get through this as best we possibly can. That means getting the equipment that we need. That means ensuring that the cooperation and the collaboration on the international stage is done properly. That means focusing right now on today and tomorrow and how we're going to keep Canadians safe. There will be plenty of time to point fingers, to ask questions, to draw conclusions, and to ensure that there are consequences for things that different countries may have done during this pandemic. Right now, My job is to look out for Canadians. Okay. Ma responsabilité en tant que Premier ministre.
My job as Prime Minister is to take care of the health and security of Canadians, and that is what I am doing and that I will continue doing. We will continue to work with various countries and the international institutions to ensure that we're doing everything necessary to get through this crisis. And after that, yes, there will be questions. There will be some thinking needed, and there might even be consequences for various countries according to how they acted during this global crisis. But for now, I must remain fixed on what's important for Canadians.
Are you suggesting, I guess, that, China might withhold PPE or something? Is that why you're not mentioning China, as you still continue to do? And on Julie's question about the way out of this, what level of testing do we need to see across Canada in order to start reopening the economy?
We've looked at the need for many more tests. So we see that testing has been a key part of controlling the spread, not just knowing who has developed COVID and can pass it on, but actually being able to control the spread through contact tracing, through isolation and quarantine measures. Testing is a key part of it. We need to continue to ramp up our testing capacities. We need to do a better job of coordinating on testing methodology and approaches across the provinces so that we can have a better vision of what is exactly happening. But testing certainly needs to increase as we move forward. Fortunately, it is increasing as we move forward.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau, Philippe Vincent, Président Radio-Canada. Sur les 125 militaires...
On the 125 medical military being sent to Quebec, how many are doctors, how many are nurses, where do they come from? Are doctors being removed from civilian hospitals? And in particular, at what point in time will they be able to go to the long-term care facilities? Answer, for the details, we'll be giving you that in the upcoming hours, but I can tell you that already this afternoon, some members of the Canadian Forces will be showing up in Quebec to evaluate the best approach to take, and in the days to come, we will see a large number of those 125 military arrive on the ground in Quebec. And on the $500 million for artists, etc., where is it going to go, to whom, how? Why isn't it CERB for them? Why special fund? I'd like to point out that the Minister Guilbeault and other of my ministers will be giving you a press conference in a couple of minutes, and we'll be able to answer all those questions and other questions on how to help artists now. But we do recognize that it is a situation where many artists are facing real difficulty, and we need artists. We need them to help us continue dreaming even in these dark times, in particular during these dark times, and that's why we want to be there to help them. Thank you very much, and this is it for the press conference today. Thank you, everyone.